We are live. What's up, everyone? Tim Stoddard here. Welcome to this week's edition of Copy Blogger Pro Masterclass. Thank you all so much for joining me. This week's masterclass is with none other than Brian Clark. I am personally very excited to watch this as well. He's been telling me about these ideas that have been toying around in his head. You guys know how Brian comes up with ideas and marinates on them for months and months and months and leaves us all waiting. And without further ado, please, I'm excited to see Brian's class. So Brian, welcome.
Thanks, Tim. This is the presentation that we thought may be cursed. It was originally scheduled for, what was it, January 20th.
Yep.
And that happened to be Inauguration Day. And what happened a couple of weeks before that made us go, maybe that's not a good idea. So we moved it a week, and then something else happened that was weird. And then we tried to do it the month after, and we had weird technical difficulties. So we did not give up. But if anything goes wrong this time, I'm just going to write this off. No, actually, I have been working on this for quite a while, so I don't want to write it off. So anyway, thanks for showing up. And we're about to, I guess we're already recording, Tim. So I'll pull the slides up and then pause, and then we'll act professional and all that good stuff. So hold on one second.
Great. And while you're doing that, let me just remind everybody, I'm going to be on mute and I'm going to have my camera turned off, but I'm going to be monitoring the chat. So if you have any questions in the meantime, I'll just put them there. We're not going to answer them until the very end. We'll leave a couple of minutes, hopefully, to answer everybody's questions, but just rest assured, feel free to put your questions in the chat and we'll get to them.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Brian Clark, and this is the Movement Persuasion Framework. This is a presentation that I've been mentally working on for a couple of years, honestly. Well, not the presentation itself, the ideas, of course, that underlie the presentation. And, when you think about it realistically, it's really a culmination of about 21 years of thinking about copywriting, which later, of course, evolved into the broader discipline of content marketing, and what it means to be effective with copy and content in building audiences, and most importantly, getting those audiences to do business with you, because of course that is the ultimate goal. An audience in itself is not really anything if they're not inclined to buy your product or service from you. So this is a big picture way to connect the dots between what you're actually trying to accomplish, from building an audience in the first place to nurturing them over time, to giving them the right type of content and messaging, and ultimately sales copy that gets more of them to do business with you. So when I first started studying copywriting, I think it was 99 or so, and I had finally understood there was very little to work with at that time. There were no real how-to books or courses or conferences. You would say these days we almost have too much information, but I started studying direct response copywriting because I understood that the internet was effectively a direct marketing medium. That doesn't mean that you do infomercials or other kind of cheesy stuff, but the underlying principles of what those techniques do are the same. It just depends on the type of human being that you're trying to reach. But human beings in general psychologically kind of respond to the same things. So I started studying copywriting and I was fascinated by it, but I would get lost. I would understand headline writing or writing compelling leads or telling stories that act as persuasion vehicles. But then when I would step away from the book or the course that I was taking at the time and try to do something, I couldn't do it because I didn't understand the big picture of how everything worked together. So obviously I figured that out. And over time, especially since I started teaching this stuff way back in 2006, my thinking has gotten more sophisticated. But at the same time, I hopefully can communicate these more sophisticated ideas in a very simple and clear way. And that's really the catch of all of this, especially when it comes to persuasion and influence, is communicating ideas that seem, new and exciting, and yet making sure that you don't leave anyone behind in the process. So, first and foremost, persuasion is not about changing people's minds. Changing people's minds is very, very difficult. We tend to not only cling to our existing beliefs and opinions, we seek out confirmation of what we already believe. That's called confirmation bias, but it's so common that to some degree we all do it. So, even if you are a large multinational with hundreds of millions of dollars in advertising budget, even then, you'll note that brands don't really change minds. It's that they have the resources to reach a broad swath of the population because they know their people are in there somewhere. Now, if you're a solopreneur or a freelancer or even a mid-sized company, you can't afford to spend that kind of money. You need to focus on attracting the people who are already like-minded, right? They want to go where you want to take them. They want a solution that you offer. The trick is getting them to choose you, because in almost every profitable realm we have today in commerce, there's a lot of competition. So you're not trying to change someone's mind to do or buy what you want them to buy. You're looking for people who are inclined in this direction already, and then you want to resonate with them very strongly. And in the process, you're going to, there are going to be people who are just not your type of people. That's okay. In fact, this process actively makes it clear who your people are and who isn't, not by being controversial or ugly or outrageous, just in the normal course of effectively communicating in an authentic way with those prospects that are right for you. So this movement persuasion framework that I've come up with, it really dates back to the time I went on sabbatical. That was the fall of 2018 into the spring of 2019. That was after we had sold Studio Press. Then we subsequently sold the Rainmaker line of business as well. So I finally had a chance to just stop and reflect in a way that I honestly hadn't had in the last 15 years, 20 years, honestly, because I was always just moving on to the next project, the next business, the next phase of my entrepreneurial journey. So this was really a time of reflection, and just kind of occurred to me that there were certain elements of every single business that I had built. All of them involved content. Of course, that was an interesting thing dating back to the late 90s because, content marketing didn't even get a name until 2008. I founded Copyblogger in 2006 and started teaching it. I just didn't call it that. So just using content at one point was kind of novel, a novel way to base and build a business. It was a different form of marketing that didn't feel like marketing. And one thing that you need to take away from this presentation is that's the key. What can we do that works like marketing, but effectively doesn't feel like marketing to the people we're talking to? It's not easy, but the ideas that you'll be presented with in today, that's the aim, right? So it's really ultimately whether you use content marketing or something else. The goal is, does this get me more customers and clients than some other approach, right? So content marketing caught on because that was the case. Even though you were giving away a lot of free stuff, you were still selling more. ultimately, right? And that's the goal. It doesn't matter that some people don't buy from you, because of course, always some people aren't going to buy for you, even if they are your ideal prospect. That's just the way things work. But when we talk about conversion rate, all that means is that more people are doing business with you than would have if you didn't take this approach, or you didn't do this form of optimization, or you didn't choose this type of copy, or this type of story, or this general strategy. Okay. So, in short, the entire framework that I'm going to share with you today is broken into three parts. They're in the order in which you proceed with them, and they all have the same root word, which is based on moving, and movement. So I want to walk you through all three steps right now, because it really does encompass the beginning of audience building, or a new direction with your existing audience, in which case you'll focus more on the people you need to be talking to and less on maybe other parts of the audience. But it's a great way also to start from scratch. And of course, you can use this for yourself. If you're a freelance writer, content marketer, of course, you can use this to attract clients. You can use it for your clients. And of course, if you are any kind of entrepreneur, solopreneur, small business owner, you can use this to sell anything. There is no, just like with content marketing, people are like, well, does content marketing work for X? It can work for anything, because really what you're doing is appealing to your prospects' psychology in a way that makes them more inclined to do business with you than someone else. But you're not going to convince someone to buy something that they don't have a need for, or don't see that they have a problem or a desire, right? So we're not selling ice to Eskimos, that sort of thing. I don't really subscribe to that belief. That goes into the realm of manipulation and coercion, if you want to be honest about it. We're not into that. We're leading people where they want to go, just in our direction as opposed to someone else's direction, or worse, just choosing to give up because they don't think they can do it at all. Okay, first up, we have move. And what I mean by move is that when people take action, that sparks their motivation. Now, you may be thinking, wait a minute, Brian, that doesn't make sense. You have to have motivation before you take action. That's how we think. But again, human psychology doesn't care what we think sometimes. A great example of this is you've started to see, for example, personal trainers or fitness coaches will tell you that to get motivated to work out, you actually start the process of working out. It sounds counterintuitive, but it works. If you're sitting around waiting for motivation to go do something that you don't really feel like doing at that moment, odds are you're not going to do it. So they advise that you put on your workout clothes, lace up your running shoes, just take the first step. When you take that first step, you are much more likely to continue on, to get in the car or to head out the door onto the path and begin working out. And then once you get into it, you are sufficiently motivated to keep going. And when you finish your workout and you've got those great endorphins and ectocannabinoids or whatever that start flowing through your body and make you feel great, that positive reinforcement then causes you to begin the process and take the action. And over time, your motivation grows. Okay. So that's what we're talking about when I say action sparks motivation. And this is really kind of a key point of, in line with what we're trying to accomplish here is, things change a lot. People, I tell people that when you want to study copywriting, you could go back to 1920 and it's all there. And they don't want to believe that because the world has changed so much from 1920. Yes, the world has changed. The context in which we live has changed drastically, but human beings have not changed. We haven't changed much, if at all, since the time of Aristotle and the Greeks. Some may say we've kind of devolved intellectually from that standpoint. Not all of us, some. But the point being, human psychology remains constant, more or less, although you do have to adapt to the changing context that's presented by technology, culture, society in general. But human beings themselves don't change. To give you some, proof of this, this is basically our new overlord, Jeff Bezos of Amazon. This was his fundamental philosophy of Amazon. Now, Amazon is incredibly innovative in the use of technology, obviously, but that's not at the core of what Amazon stands for. Bezos says, what's not going to change? Human beings aren't going to change. So that's the entire core of what makes Amazon so successful and makes Bezos the richest man in the world. Now, the key components here of what makes us human can really be boiled down into three things: belief, emotion, and belonging. And we're going to cover all three of these in this presentation. What we believe is not probably, it is, but we don't think about it much, but it is what makes us who we are, and it is what drives our behavior. Tied to belief is emotion. Some people like to think that emotions are universal and that we all kind of experience fear and sadness and grief and anger the same way, but it's not true. How we experience those emotions is always influenced by what we believe in the first place. That's very important because a lot of amateur or starting copywriters will try to pull those emotional strings. If you don't know your prospect and what they believe, you pull it in the wrong way and you create the opposite reaction than you wanted. And this has people scratching their heads. Often I think this is what happens when people say content marketing doesn't work. No, you just don't understand what content to give to your particular prospect. And let's face it, probably because you don't understand your prospect really at the level that you need to. And then finally, there's belonging. And you'll see as we progress through the framework that belonging is what we're really trying to evoke with our audience, that they belong together and that they belong with us as the entrepreneur or as the marketer, the content marketer for a larger brand, that they belong together with what that brand stands for. Okay, so everything I've just told you is really what direct response copywriting encompasses, right? We have to understand who people are, what they want, what they desire, what they believe, and how they're going to emotionally respond, and who they want to belong with, and who they aspire to belong with in order to get them to take action, to move. And so, this is direct response copywriting, again, dates back to about the 1920s when we were able to start measuring scientifically how people reacted. It was really the beginning points of what is taken for granted today as the massive amounts of data that we have accumulated on people. Even at our level, the data of behavioral responses that you can see just in your email marketing software shows you an incredible amount about what people respond to and what they don't. So normal copywriting or brand copywriting is kind of, focused on clever messages and whatnot. It's not really designed to make you take action. Again, the internet or digital marketing in general is a direct marketing medium, meaning there's no intermediary. You're trying to get someone to do something thanks to the words and the images and whatnot that you put together. And that's key. And that's why direct response copywriting has become the default form of copywriting for the digital world. Now, The other day, it was interesting. I saw a copywriter who positioned herself. She said, I'm not one of those old school direct response copywriters. I'm a conversion copywriter. That's the same thing. Okay. What is conversion? Conversion is getting people to take your desired action. That's a response. That's direct response copywriting. Now, I'm not faulting this person for positioning themselves that way, because that's a key element of direct response copywriting and digital marketing, of all kind of marketing, honestly. And that's positioning, which is you've got to make something that's the same seem unique. And for the most part, it works wonderfully. And we all have to do this. And this is a key aspect of what I'm talking to you about. How do you position yourself with your brand, with your messaging, with your content for your type of prospect? So I am in no means being critical of positioning. The only thing I'm pointing out to you is the better you get at this, the more you see right through everyone's positioning. Does it matter? Not really. Like if someone is positioned in a way that's pleasing to me and I want what they're selling, I'm going to buy it from them instead of someone else. So even though I can see through it, it still works. In my case, I usually just annoy my wife because she'll be like obviously influenced by positioning. And I'm like, that's just marketing. You're a marketing victim. It's no different from the other thing. And this does not go over well at all for my marriage. So be careful with these superpowers. Great responsibility usually means just be quiet. Okay. So that brings us to a key element of getting someone to take action in the first place. And that's, why does this matter to them? Like, you want them to do it, sure, but that they don't care about that at all. They care about what matters to them. So again, something matters to someone, you're not going to change their mind and tell them that it does matter. There's so many marketers that operate from, you need to do this. This would be good for you. You should. If the prospect that you're talking to does not buy into that, they don't think it matters to them, then they're not a prospect at all. So again, it's key to speak to people who do have this initial intrinsic motivation to listen to you in the first place. So for example, my son is 16, he has ADHD. This can be a challenge, obviously, to get him to focus on things. That does not mean that he can't focus. He can focus insanely well at anything he really wants to do, right? In fact, ADHD people have a higher level of focus on the things they are intrinsically motivated to focus on, like, what is the latest video game he's paying attention to? Let's just say he hates Fortnite. It's Destiny 2 at this moment. Cool. And then he got back into Minecraft. So anyway, so again, it's the same thing with everyone. Now you may know people who say, ADD is not a real thing because everyone has that, right? To some degree, that's true. It's a spectrum, right? So to officially be ADHD, you are over on the far end of one side, but we're all like that to some degree, just maybe not to a clinical level. So again, if you want someone to pay attention to you and to take the action that you want, you have to be talking to people who are in line with the why. It has to matter to them in the first place. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to end up doing business with you, but it's the starting point that you have to begin with, or there is no room for persuasion or influence. They're just going to tune you out and go listen to someone else. Which brings us to the next obvious thing. Who are you talking to? I mean, you really have to understand, and this is probably the reason why most marketing and advertising just misses the mark. It's maybe an assumption of who you're talking to and what they believe and what they want, what they desire, what their problems are trying to solve. And the difference between that and really understanding who you're talking to. And if you can really drill down and understand at a deep level who you're talking to, then I almost think you've got more than half the battle there. Yes, you still have to craft engaging content and copy. Yes, but you know what to say. When you don't know what to say, it doesn't matter how you say it. To paraphrase an old David Ogilvy thing, what you say is the most important thing at all. Because again, if they don't care about what you're saying, everything else, you could be the most engaging, snarky or just clever copywriter in the world, and you will fail badly. Okay, so the converse of knowing who you're talking to is to also actively understand who you're not talking to. So often when we're trying to really get a feel for who we're talking to, we create, various forms. It could be an archetype, it could be an avatar, it could be a persona, whatever language you want to use there. It's basically something that a description that represents the person you're talking to, and you can keep that person in your mind as if you're talking to them individually. Okay, so the converse of that is that you also have to have a firm picture in your head of who you're not talking to, because you don't want to coddle them. You don't want to appease them. You don't want to create content that says, oh yeah, but maybe if you're like this, that's wishy-washy, boring content. Nobody cares. Your engagement will be pathetic. The opposite of love is not hate, it's apathy. And that's what most content online inspires. Nothing, right? It's just boring. Now, a word of warning about this, of course, the other and the concept of us versus them, tribalism, is responsible for some of the worst things that have ever happened in human history. It's that powerful. I'm not talking about going to that level whatsoever. In fact, I don't even believe necessarily, unless the situation explicitly calls for it, ever attacking the other. One of my favorite ad campaigns that I use as an example all the time is the Get a Mac campaign. Justin Long is the cool hipster Mac, and the other guy, John Hodgkins, I think, represents the PC. Like no one wanted to, in the target swing user demographic that Apple was going after, no one wanted to be the PC guy. But they didn't belittle the PC guy. They didn't insult him. He just represented what many people think the PC stands for. That was reinforced. People said, I'm a Mac person. And it was an amazingly successful campaign for Apple. They didn't convert any hardcore PC users because that wasn't the goal. They were going for the casual swing user who bought a PC because everyone was getting computers during the 90s. And then as we moved into the new century, they were like, you may really be a Mac person, not a PC person, now that you think about it. And that's exactly what happened. So be very careful with this. It's very important to understand who you don't want and to let them go, but do it in a very natural way by speaking to who you do want. You will naturally exclude the other because you are not catering to their beliefs and their values and their aspirations. And that is important. I just rewatched the show Lost. I don't know if you've ever seen this. A lot of people have, obviously, but there's a plane crash. These people land on an island. Turns out there's other people on the island, and the survivors of the plane crash refer to these people as the others. And then when they eventually interact with each other, they're like, how did you become an other? And the other says, we don't call ourselves the others. We call you the others. Get it? So there's always an other for every group. It's not about being ugly, but it is about being purposefully exclusionary. You need to engage very strongly with who you want, and that means letting other people decide you're not for them. So in the process of understanding what people are looking for, that's usually encompassed in your topic and how you position it, and also who you're talking to, which is also a function of positioning yourself for a certain type of audience. You have to get to a certain point where this really starts to pay off for you. So again, if you're doing this for yourself and you're starting off from scratch, it can be very hard at the beginning stages to get the kind of traction you need, especially to get the right people. But when you do get to that point, I call that the minimum viable audience. This is a term I coined back in 2011. It's kind of caught on now, to where you'll see it in many different contexts. But the key is that certain things happen when you get to that point, and it's all good. This is when you start seeing the fruits of your labor paying off. So you have a minimum viable audience when the audience is giving you clear feedback of what they like and what they don't like. That can be as simple as watching what they click on, right? They're also sharing. They're voluntarily sharing your content because it resonates with them, and they want, basically the prestige that comes with sharing cool stuff. In social media right now, it's actually a way to build your own reputation to, based on what you share with others and being known as someone who shares quality things. And then finally, if you're at the entrepreneurial stage, as opposed to working with an existing brand, you'll start to see strong indications of pain points and desires that will lead you to have a much higher chance of creating the right successful product for your audience. So when I talk about this, invariably people are like, okay, how many people is a minimum viable audience? And that misses the point. They're like, is it 5,000? Is it 10,000? Is it 50,000? Well, the good news is it's nowhere near 50,000. But there is no clear answer, because it's not the size of the audience that makes it viable. It's the number of people within that audience that are highly engaged. So there are people with a list of 2,000 or 3,000 people who crush it. And then there are people with 20,000 people, low engagement, low open rates, low click rates. They may have found a technique, whether they spent the money on advertising or something happened to where they were able to accumulate that audience, but that audience is not the same level of valuable asset as a smaller, more engaged list. So don't think in terms of absolute numbers. Think in terms of highly engaged. These are the people who are demonstrating that they are taking action, that they are moved. You are causing them to move. All right. So basically, unifying commonalities lead to unified action. That's what conversion means. The more you're able to get people to take the action you want, the higher your conversion rate. And it goes to show that the more your people share things in common, the more you're able to get them to take a similar action. Now, there are emerging ways through personalization and segmentation where you can have different language for different subgroups. That's fine. That's actually a best practice. What I'm talking about is at a higher level. You want unifying commonalities that the entire audience shares. And that's really what we're talking about now. When you get down to the level of personalization, you're really focusing on ways in which people are slightly different. So you can alter your language, but that doesn't mean they're completely different from anyone else in the audience. Think of it in terms of a book. The broader theme remains consistent throughout your content and your messaging, while the particulars of any landing page or email that you can change for a particular segment, it will boost conversion for that subgroup, but it won't be radically different from what the audience shares in general. So what are unifying commonalities? The most common way to think about this is demographics, right? So these are people of a certain age, a certain income, a certain educational level, right? These are demographic factors. They're really just kind of cold, hard facts about where people are, but it doesn't tell you really who they are. and who they are is more important. Now, demographics can be a great starting point. My email newsletter Further is aimed at people who are at midlife. It just so happens at this particular point in time, that age group, commonly known as 40 to 55, is exactly Generation X, which is my generation. So I'm able to speak to them from a demographic standpoint, and this means that a certain time period, they have certain common experiences like the 80s, certain films, music, ideas, attitudes, etc. But that's starting to get us beyond demographics into psychographics. Now, psychographics are commonly kind of summed up as values, attitudes, and lifestyles, or VAL. Okay. This is more of who they are than where they fit in some demographic data chart. And this is much more powerful. So again, Further is for people who are technically in Generation X, but the way I communicate with them, the topics I choose are all based on psychographics. Like, you have to be a certain type of person with certain type of values and attitudes and live a certain type of life in order to find Further valuable. For one, you have to have a growth mindset, or you won't be interested in a newsletter that talks about personal growth, right? So right there, that's an exclusionary thing. In that case, the others are people with a fixed mindset. Now, okay, so I'm assuming through both the topics and the way I speak to people that they have a growth mindset, that they think they can change. But I constantly reinforce that the fact that they can change, because it doesn't, just because they have the capacity for it doesn't mean I can just assume that and go straight into something that's really beyond where they are as people. Okay. So psychographic is more about, again, values, attitudes, lifestyle. It's how they live. It's how they identify themselves. It's how they think and what they believe. And then the final stage here of how you communicate through psychographics is what I call empathetic marketing, which, beyond intellectually knowing what their values are and what their lifestyles are like, you're able to put yourself in their shoes and walk the path in them, right? That's the colloquial definition of empathy. But it's absolutely necessary to go beyond intellectually understanding something and be able to experience what they feel as well. So again, if you're working for a brand, you need to spend a lot of time figuring out what they stand for, what they believe in, either looking at their current customer base, the people who are their best customers, right? That's a good place to start. But it can also be, the principals, the executives, the founders of the company as well. If you're doing this for yourself, number one best way to be able to do truly empathetic marketing in an authentic way, intentionally attract people who share the same values that you do. Core values, right down there at the center of everything. And again, that sometimes confuses people. Like, for example, though, Apple, their core values are creativity, individuality, bucking the status quo, think different, right? They rode that all away from the launch of the Macintosh with the Big Brother commercial in 1984. And it's been in every ad campaign they've done through that Get a Mac campaign. Now Apple's so huge that they kind of just try to appeal to everyone. And I guess that's a nice luxury to have. I don't know that any of us on this presentation will ever get to that point. So we really need to be cognizant of what we stand for authentically. And that way you can just be yourself and not be worried that you're going to say the wrong thing necessarily. Of course, there are boundaries. Give me a break. And even if people agree with you, but in the general day-to-day things, you don't have to worry about just saying something and then meeting all this outrage. But actually you will, to a certain degree. You'll say something and someone in your audience won't like it. And whether you want to respond to them or not, I've chosen not to these days. I just want them to unsubscribe. Sometimes I'll unsubscribe them for them, right? They're not my person. They're the other. Not that I'm going to be ugly to them. I just don't need to talk to them. Okay, that takes us into the next phase, which is moving. So we spend a lot of time on figuring out who we're talking to, what matters to them, because you can't get someone to take that initial action. You can't get them to lace up their running shoes if they don't ultimately want to go in that direction in the first place. But now we've got them on the path. They've taken that initial action. Hopefully that involved subscribing to an email list where we can stay in contact with them on a constant basis. So moving in this context has a double connotation as well. On one sense, we want them to keep moving down the path along the buyer's journey, if you will. And also moving means, it stands for something, an emotional reaction. But the emotions that we're trying to invoke here aren't necessarily so overt and so strong as to be, an express sadness or rage or joy. Sometimes that's going to happen, but most of the times the emotions that motivate us are much more subtle. In fact, all of our actions are motivated by emotions, whether you're cognizant of it or not, or you classify it personally as an emotion. That's what it is. So what we're trying to do now that we've got someone, we've identified the correct person to take on the buyer's journey with us, how do we keep them going? And that's really the key to excellent long-term content marketing, an excellent launch sequence, and an effective sales funnel. At each step along the way, they keep going and they're a little bit more inclined to take the action that you want. And in this case, at the end of that road is a purchase decision. So effectively, if we are trying to motivate people to continue on a journey, you are in fact a leader, right? But the type of leadership that we want to have with our prospects is not really about telling them blatantly what to do. In fact, we want to guide people in a way where, as far as they're concerned, it was their idea the whole time. And don't get me wrong, it has to be. But that doesn't mean we want to do things all the time that we don't follow through on. So a really skilled marketer, really skilled entrepreneur will become a leader for that person in a way that is nurturing, right? We talk about nurturing leads. What does that mean? Really, you're acting as a mentor to them. You're giving them the right type of advice that keeps them on the path, even though it's ultimately all up to them, right? So I found that the idea of mentor marketing, where you lead your prospects to success, is a very useful metaphor for how content marketing actually works. Even in this day and age, as mature as content marketing is at this point, a lot of people just don't understand what it means. Some people think as long as you're creating content and putting it on a web page, you're doing content marketing. Nope. Some people think content marketing is just creating content for Google. Nope. SEO is a subset of content marketing. What content marketing really is providing information that takes a prospect from point A down the journey, however many steps. If it's a expensive or complex product, it's more steps than if it's a simple product, but it's always a journey and you're the guide. So an important way to do this, to keep people moving down the path, is, of course, to overcome what they view as their obstacles, and then, of course, objections to entering into some sort of transaction with you, right? And I like to say, and it's a kind of a common copywriting trope, that every question that a prospect has is really an objection. And if your content and your copy does not address all of those objections, those questions, those obstacles, you're probably not going to succeed in getting them to buy. So again, in order to understand what the objections and obstacles are, you have to really understand who you're talking to and what motivates them in the first place to go on this journey to solve a problem or to satisfy desire. One really effective way to do that, once you understand what the obstacles and objections are, is to use framing and reframing. Let's focus on framing is just how you present an issue. The broader discipline of positioning is a way of framing a particular thing. For example, there's tons of small business advice websites out there. John Jantz framed his as duct tape marketing. Duct tape is an incredible metaphor for the type of person that John is trying to attract, the type of person John is, and the type of advice he gives. It's practical. It's low cost. It's not fancy. It just works. That's everything that duct tape stands for, right? So think about it that way. Now with reframing, you're taking something that people think of in one way, and you're changing it so that they see it differently. Now, this is literally thought leadership in the least pretentious way ever. If you can change the way people think about something that is an impediment to their success or an impediment to them doing business with you so you can get them that success, then you are a leader in the best sense of the word. It's not about, some pretentious or uppity thing. It's understanding people and helping them in the right way. That's really what thought leadership is or should be. I know people use the term in the other ways, and I hate that. And I also would strongly recommend that you not ever call yourself a thought leadership. You demonstrate thought leadership. So let me give you an example of reframing. With further, again, people at midlife, 40s and 50s, retirement is closer than it's ever been. In this particular case, Generation X is way behind on retirement savings for where they need to be at this age, right? So that's just data. We know this. So that causes a lot of anxiety. You add to that Gen X will likely live a bit longer than anyone has lived up to this point. That's already been happening each generation through just extensions in medical science, better understanding, better health practices, all of that. You add to that there's billions of dollars being poured into longevity science at this point, and there's a good chance that you can kind of diminish or defeat the diseases of aging. That's what kills you. It's not aging that kills you. Aging causes you to have certain diseases that kill you. So anyway, that just adds a whole nother layer, which means I'm going to live longer. So I have to save even more money to retire at 65 so I don't run out. So there's this idea of unretirement. Now, unretirement started with older baby boomers who retired. Boomers got plenty of money. That's not the issue, but they were bored to death. They lacked purpose. They lost their identity because work is so much a part of who we are, right? That's our belief system that leads to who we are and the story we tell about ourselves. So they went back to work. They either went back into corporate America or they started a business. They did something that was more engaging than improving, your golf game. Then the concept, through no participation on my part, evolved so that younger baby boomers who hadn't retired yet kind of inherently started understanding, I guess, from some of their older peers that, hey, retirement's not all it's cracked up to do. Are you sure you want to do this? Data shows you're probably going to die in a couple of years after you retire because you've lost your will or your reason to live, your purpose. That's everything. So these people, they're planning to quit their current job or leave their current career, but they're not going to just go and sit around somewhere. They're going to start a new business. They're going to join a nonprofit. They're going to enter a new stage of their life where they don't stop working. They're just going to do something that is more personally meaningful to them, and that fills them with more of a sense of purpose. So extrapolating from that, what I did with Further was reframe I can't retire to you don't want to retire. What you want to do is start living the life you want or that you envision in retirement in the next few years by taking control of your life, starting your own business, going out on your own, avoiding, impending layoffs due to ageism and technology that we'll be facing in this decade, right? So that's an idea of reframing a negative into a positive, which is also in line with how I best can help them. So that's an example, but reframing is one of the most powerful things. If you can change the way someone thinks for the better, you will have a potential fan for life. So really what you're doing here when you're taking people on to keep them going on the journey, it's a function of empowerment and transformation. Now, when I say this to people, they're like, man, we sell widgets or we sell this or some other thing. And it's not about empowerment or transformation. At some level, just like I said before, there are degrees and there are places on a spectrum. But every time we buy something, it's either to change something or to make us be able to fix something. That's empower and transformation. We're only talking about to different degrees. And if you do sell something that doesn't empower or transform someone to some degree, it probably doesn't sell. But the fact that people do buy it should prompt you to go, okay, what are people really buying here? It's not a widget, it's something else. And now that brings us to the third stage, which is movement. And in this sense, I'm talking about starting a movement. And again, this is one of those things where like, I understand that certain brands like Harley Davidson and Apple and, they kind of embody this idea of a movement. And then there's other things like there was the blogging movement, which led to the content marketing movement. We've got the no code movement. We've got the minimalism movement, right? To some degree, this is present in any engaged audience that you can build. And if you can embody this type of attitude with your marketing, it will in fact transcend marketing into something bigger. Now, again, as with calling yourself a thought leader, I don't want you to come out and say, hey, we're starting a movement here. I think there are some situations where that's warranted, but it's in a commercial context, you're just going to get a bunch of eye rolls if you come out and say it. However, you need, just like you demonstrate your expertise, you demonstrate your leadership, you have to demonstrate and make the people who are involved feel like that they're in a movement. And really, a movement is just a group of people who are unified in a common goal. And as we went through this presentation, that's been the theme the entire time. That's what we've been working up for. Unified group of people taking unified action. And so that may, lead you to think, okay, this is where you mentioned belonging, and you're right. But it's a different spin on belonging in that it's about being different together in some aspect of your life. So again, who you are is what you believe. And when we connect with people, it's usually because we have some semblance of shared identity, which means we have shared beliefs. Now, this doesn't have to be, an all-encompassing thing. You can find common ground with someone over Marvel movies or knitting or whatever the case may be. It doesn't necessarily have to be politics or religion or culture, these big unifying, identifying aspects of our lives. Now, it certainly can be, but what I'm trying to get across to you is just like everything else, there are degrees of belief and identity that we have in common with others. And again, it's usually in our own minds how we're different from others rather than, oh, you're the same. It's we're different together. And there you go. So the Venn diagram is a great example here. It doesn't have to be one circle of overlapping commonalities. It's this context. We are unified in this context. You're different, like I'm different when it comes to Marvel movies, knitting, starting a solo business, content marketing, what have you. We live in a world of niche, and what you find with your audience is where people have those unifying commonalities together, and then you bond them together even stronger with you by demonstrating that you are also different like they're different. So again, this leads us to what may now seem like an obvious statement that too many marketers in general and content marketers in particular don't seem to get. Connection happens with those who share our values, beliefs, convictions, attitudes, and motivations. Those who do not share those things will not be engaged and therefore are not people who we are trying to attract or keep in our audience. There is never a reason to be afraid of taking a stand, saying what you believe, saying what you stand for. Again, I'm not talking, everyone, when you say that, they think it's got to be some big stand like political or social justice or religion or something like that. Everything is a level of interest. Everything that's in a level of interest is an opportunity for connection. And it's finding those people who have that connecting point. Now, this is so common sense. If you're at a cocktail party and you start talking to someone and it's clear you have nothing in common with them, you believe radically different things, every topic you switch to, they go in the other direction. Are you going to stand there and keep trying to keep that conversation going? No, both of you are just going to go and talk to someone else. That's how it works. So why, with our audiences, do we get dismayed when people, unsubscribe? It's really bizarre because, you'll have somebody, I said this thing that I really stand for. And a lot of people sent me notes telling me that was dead on and that they're more invested in what I have to say than ever. But 100 people unsubscribe. Who cares? Good. Do you understand that that's what you're trying to do, right? And you have to live that. Can't be afraid of it. And if you're serving clients, I know it's tough, but you got them to buy into that, or they have to accept that it's their fault that content marketing isn't working for them, not the discipline or your fault. And that's why you need to choose your clients carefully. So how do we communicate this congruency, this we belong together or we're different, the same together compared to everyone else? And of course, that is with their own language. And this again predates the internet. Master copywriter Eugene Schwartz used to read tabloids and trashy magazines if he had to communicate for a product with the people who read those particular publications, because he said that's how they speak. That's who they are. You have to meet them there. So this is called voice of customer commonly now in copywriting circles. It's where you're effectively talking to your customers and mimicking, taking notes and noting the language they use, not what you would prefer, not the clever turn of phrase that you like. You want to mirror back to them the language that they use. The only reason I cross out customer there, it's incredibly important that you do this, is because when you're building an audience, you're not trying to talk about a product or a service. You're not talking about a transaction. You're at a preceding level and even a deeper level when you think about it, where you're addressing fundamental aspects of their belief system and their desires for belonging and their emotional responses by understanding the broader pain that ultimately the product can solve. Now, there should be a lot of congruency between what your customers say and your best prospects say as far as the language they use, but not always. And you don't know. And when you start using that customer-centric language too early, you can actually shoot yourself in the foot because you're at an earlier stage. They're starting the journey. They're not at the point where they need to see certain language in a sales page. So we need to talk about voice of the audience, or how you say it, which is really what copywriting comes down to. And one of the biggest misconceptions people have about copywriting is that it's about the copywriter and their word choice and their cleverness. No, a good copywriter does the upfront work, understands how the audience speaks, and mirrors that back to them, right? So is keyword research for SEO? Eventually, but at first, it's understanding the language that the audience uses when it's thinking about a certain topic, a certain problem, a certain desire. Later, right? Well, really not even later. If you're using that language naturally for a true marketing purpose, then, the Google robots are going to pick up on that, because that's what people are searching for. That's what people are intending. Their intent is expressed through that language. So there's a direct congruency. You never have to, when people say, write for people, don't write for Google, that's a valid point. But people use Google, and Google's gotten really good with their algorithm at parsing the same thing. That's what they want. So the language of the audience, it's not just for SEO. It's not just for the ultimate sale. It begins at the very beginning of connecting with the right people and bringing them forward. So this really all comes together from a psychological standpoint when you understand the unity effect. So those of you, and I hope everyone, if not, you need to read Dr. Robert Cialdini's the latest version of his book, Influence. He's a social psychologist who identified 6 primary drivers of influence. Even if you haven't read the book, you're probably familiar with them: authority, social proof, liking, reciprocity, commitment, and consistency. So for decades, Cialdini's career was made by the research he did and the tests that he performed in order to understand and establish these 6 principles of influence. And decades later, he added a 7th. And not only did he add a 7th, he said it was the most powerful of all. And I've done a lot of thinking about this because, again, this was the thing I was doing for 20 years without even knowing it. It's really, if you think about it, the extension of the old sales adage, know, like, and trust. Well, why do people know, like, and trust you? It's because you're like them. There's unifying commonalities between you and them. So really, I don't think of unity as a 7th principle of influence, or even just the most powerful one. I kind of see it as a meta level of influence, where every other of the 6 operate within the context of unity. You may have heard reports that we don't trust authority figures and institutions as much as we used to, but we will trust an authority figure if they are our type of people, if we belong with them. And that's why this movement framework is so important. It doesn't matter how much of an expert you are. If someone says, you don't know what you're talking about because you're not like me, if that sounds irrational, it is, but that doesn't mean that's not how human beings are. We don't live in an idealized world. We have to take people as we find them, and people don't change, at least not in our lifetimes. So the unity effect is really what we're trying to accomplish with this entire framework. And it really depends on choosing the right people so that they will choose you. So you have unity and belief in action between brand and audience. You're authoritative to them because you're one of them. Social proof works When it's people like you, people don't care when it's other people, the others, right? So social proof is not an absolute dynamic, pure numbers. Oh, you guest posted in this magazine. I hate that magazine. That's not for people like me, right? Makes sense. Liking, obvious. Liking, I kind of drug the unity principle before Cialdini added it separately. I thought it was functioning solely as an aspect of liking, which is a very powerful thing. We do business with people we like, but it's more than that, because I pay attention to people and I've done business with people that I don't necessarily like, but they resonate with me because we have these unifying commonalities, reciprocity, all of the elements of influence are really need to be within the umbrella of unity in order to work. And I think this has been the case for a long time. It's just that we're beginning to understand this better through the disciplines of, psychology, study of neuroscience of emotion. But belonging, you'll note, is one of the key steps on the hierarchy of needs that Maslow promulgated years ago. It is incredibly powerful. And that's how you get to something that transcends marketing, something that's more than marketing. I call it a movement because that's what it looks like. You don't have to call it a movement, and you don't necessarily have to be changing the world with your product or service in order to put these principles to use. You don't have to call it a movement. No one has to recognize it as that. It's more of an intention. It's more of trying to do more than marketing that allows you to transcend marketing, not just calling it something any more than calling yourself an expert will make people believe you, right? It's all about demonstrating. And that's what content marketing in general is fantastic at. It's not about claiming things. It's not about promising an experience after they buy. It's about beginning a beneficial experience right from the beginning of the relationship, all the way through the steps of the buying journey until they do become your customer or client. And remember, it doesn't end there, because the only thing better than getting a new customer is getting a repeat or recurring customer. So the process continues at a higher level, even beyond the purchase. And that is the movement persuasion framework. I hope they found this useful to you. I continue to develop these concepts beyond the scope of one presentation, and you'll likely be hearing about that in the near future. But for now, I hope this really changes the way you think about quote unquote marketing, so that you're able to do something that's more effective than simple marketing does.
Amazing. Thank you, Brian. I am thrilled to have finally gotten to see underneath the hood of this concept that you've been talking about. We have a couple questions. I'm going to be a little bit selfish here and ask a personal question. I remember when Further was just a curated newsletter full of links. And then when you came back from your sabbatical was when you decided to really, really focus on that particular audience that you talked about. Where was that inflection point for you when this movement concept came in and you realized that people need to have a commonality in their tribe? Was that what led you to that decision?
Like I said, it was before that point. Actually, yeah, the whole movement thing came around the same time, and probably influenced the decision on Further. But a big part of the decision with Further is I'm in a position to do whatever I want. And then I realized, but everyone needs to be in this position to make that choice, to not care about who you're not talking to. But I've been doing it my entire career. I was never necessarily the founder of the movement, but I became a leader in movement. So let me, this could have fit in the presentation if we had more time. But so my first successful business was really just, a solo law practice because I had to pay the bills to support the one business I started that failed. Okay. And that was email newsletters 23 years ago. So go figure, email newsletters. So there was nothing really innovative about that. The only interesting part about that was the way I marketed myself for attorneys at the time. It was unheard of. I gave away free content on the internet through an email newsletter, and it worked. And that led me to go, okay, I need to start a business that has nothing to do with law. And that led me to real estate. So I'm looking around. Obviously, I was attracted by the large commissions. I can't say that real estate really fulfilled any sense of purpose, but at that stage of my life, I had a chip on my shoulder and something to prove. I had to prove that I could make it without practicing law. But what I ended up doing was taking who I was and pairing it with technology trends at the time. You know how you can look at home listings on websites, right? That's called IDX. I don't know if you're familiar with this or not. That's a technology that allows you to display the MLS on your website. That's how Zillow exists, basically. But at the time, it was 2001. This was brand new, and I jumped all over it because I understood search engines and SEO, and I knew people were searching for home listings online. So that was my attraction strategy, and the MLS was my content. But I didn't stop there. I created an entire educational website about why they should work for me. Now, what would be the angle that would work there? Well, I only represented buyers because as an attorney, I know that the real estate industry is horribly in favor of home sellers. Like the realtor actually represents the sellers. If you go and work with the listing agent, you are getting hosed. No doubt about it, right? And sometimes you have to, you're forced. Like in a hot real estate market, you're probably going to bid over the asking price anyway. So who cares? It's all out the window. But in a normal market, you want someone working for you to get the best price and represent you exclusively. So there was a movement within the real estate industry, never went mainstream, like never became dominant, even though I think it should, of exclusive buyer agencies. So there you can see right there an active positioning. I was like, okay, I'm an attorney. How do I play that up? Well, I talk about all this stuff about fiduciary duty and how you're going to get screwed unless you work with someone like me. Worked like a charm, just took off. The combination of giving the home listings to buyers and the information about how I could provide them with a better experience. And I went from 0 to 10 grand a month in no time, while most people struggle for 3-4 years to even make it in real estate. So I chose a movement. I didn't start it. I just recognized it, and it matched my personal qualifications and my sense of purpose. Same thing happened with blogging. I was using blogs in 99. I didn't start one officially, like a proper blog, until Copyblogger. Why? It wasn't ready yet, right? But it was like, is this a real movement or is this a fad just for nerdy people? And for a while it was, right? But then it became clear that it was a real thing, and it was changing it was changing digital media. It was changing what it meant to be a publisher. And what I knew about content and selling products and services instead of advertising, again, gave me an in. And that's why Copyblogger took off so quickly. Content marketing became a movement, right?
Yeah.
And Joe Paluzzi really was, had been thinking about it for a long time and came up with the name. I still to this day tell him it's a horrible name, but that's what stuck. So that was another movement. WordPress, it was a movement, an open source movement. So you see, I'm sitting here in France having a glass of wine at a cafe, and this occurs to me. I'm just thinking back over my career. And so I was unconsciously, I suppose, doing this all along. And I was like, this is why you haven't failed. It's this mindset of trying to do something bigger than marketing is why you're so good at marketing. And there you have it.
Yeah. It's really interesting. Thank you for that insight. All right. Let's grab a couple questions here. We have Jane. Any further thoughts on research outside of keywords, or is that the bomb? I know who my market are, but I clearly need to drill further.
Now, most of my research historically beyond keywords has been, kind of lurking on people online because you want to watch them unscripted in their own authentic environments. They're not, that's why I never did surveys. I don't have anything against surveys as long as you're careful with the way you word the questions. But my preferred method is always just to watch people. So in the early days of blogging and social media, it was just a gold mine because you had all these new sources of interaction and commentary, but it wasn't as overwhelming as it became starting in 2010 when social media went mainstream and it became very difficult. I mean, still it's all there. So you just have to, be methodical and pay attention to the right groups and take notes and notice the patterns and the commonalities. Again, you're not trying to figure any one person out. You're trying to figure out what all these people have in common, and you can do it pretty easily. Now, I just started using Rand Fishkin's Spark Toro.
It's cool.
It's literally audience research.
Yeah.
It still takes a little, you gotta understand enough to be able to find the right things to search for in the first place, much like keyword research.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really good because you can find, social accounts you may have never seen, social influencers, websites you've never heard of. And it's just an incredible amount of insight, but new locations to go lurk on your audience. Much more targeted than just going to Twitter and trying to search something in a search box.
Yeah. Spark Turo is, it's a very insightful product. I think 5 years from now, this whole concept of audience insights is going to be even bigger than it is. So
yeah. And it's been going for a year and I knew he was doing it, but I've been so busy that I didn't really focus on it. And then I did. I'm like, oh, this is what I need.
Yeah.
And honestly, people over at Unemployable were struggling with audience research because again, it's like drinking from a fire hose.
Yep.
And so I've started recommending it. I don't think there's any affiliate program or anything. I'm certainly not being compensated for it. It's just a tool I use.
Yeah, and he told me he's not even going to do an affiliate program for it. He just wants it to
probably doesn't need to. You got a good tool. It's fun.
Yeah. Okay, Rosa has a really important question because this is something that I know I struggled with a lot in the beginning. This seems to be a really, really common pitfall with people that are creating content, starting to build an audience. Brian, I have a question. If I give my followers and subscribers the information to go from A to Z, basically mentor marketing for free, then they won't buy from me because I will have given all of the information before they buy. How do you recommend I solve this?
Well, there's a lot of different ways to approach this, and it depends on what you're selling. It sounds like you're selling information, maybe a course or a book or something. Mm-hmm. I will say that, people like Seth Godin have blogged their entire book and then still made the bestseller list later. So don't get too hung up on that. But generally, you focus on the why quite a bit, on the journey, why they need to take the next step and then the next step and the next step. And then all of a sudden the product is there if it's a course or what have you. Another technique that dates back to that guy, Eugene Schwartz, that I told you about in the 1960s. He started out as a copywriter for hire, then became an entrepreneur, an information entrepreneur. He sold how-to books. And in his copy, he would give away the best part of the book and people would buy even more than when he didn't, because people need the whole picture. They need the context, right? So even though you gave them like that killer nugget of information that really kind of solves the problem, they need the entire framework to go with. There's a guy named Sean D'Souza, teaches writing. He's also an entrepreneur. This is a little sexist, but I'll say it anyway. He calls it the bikini principle, which is no matter how much you're showing, people still want to see the rest. So,
something that I've been toying around with a lot, and this is not a revolutionary concept by any means, but for whatever reason, I heard it in such a simple way, and it really helped. It was the free content should basically be the problem. So you can, and it requires a lot of discipline because when I write, I can't focus on like consistently saying the same thing, finding a thousand different ways to outline the same problem, right? So you create content around the problem and then you sell the solution. So that is a simple
yeah, that's another
formula.
way of saying the why, right?
Sure.
Like, yeah. And also taking all those opportunities to reframe how they think about the problem, because a lot of times the reason people don't buy isn't because they buy from someone else. They just don't buy at all because they
Hmm.
don't think they can do it. So it's really go back to that empowerment. So it seems like it's kind of rah-rah, which I don't do. I'm not a rah-rah guy. I
Me
just
neither.
don't. But I can, I've been with Further, I've been talking about certain issues like the personal enterprise, which is a way of thinking about self-employment that gets better and better over time. I've been talking about unretirement. I've been talking about transformation, purpose, meaning, all these things that the audience is going, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mm.
And now when I launch the Further product, it's going to say, okay, let's knock all these things out with this one thing. Here's how you can do it, right? In detail. So that's one key. But keep in mind, if you're selling software, you can give away the whole farm of information. They still
Yeah.
need the tool,
Yeah.
right? So for those, not selling more information, content marketing is just like a free for all. You could write an entire book for free. And that's effectively what I did over the course of, really 2008 to 2018 when we sold. We were selling software and web hosting and whatnot. So I probably wrote 5 books worth of stuff and gave it away for free because I wanted you to buy, recurring software and hosting products, which was incredibly more lucrative than writing books.
Sure. And then I think you really touched on the point that it matters what you're selling. So if you're selling services, I've always had the concept that like my content is quite literally telling you what I'm going to do and just banking on the fact that you'd rather pay me to do it than do it yourself. So you're
Oh yeah,
basically,
for service industries, oh my gosh.
yeah.
Like that, and that was the thing I used to encounter in the early days. I'd get lawyers going, "Why are you giving this away?" And then realtors, "Why are you giving this away?" And I'm like, in both cases, you are literally licensed by the state as a professional. If they can take what you give away and do a better job than you,
Hmm.
you're not very good at what you do, right? And plus, you've got a license, right? And yet people were like, "No, I'm not giving away all that stuff. What if they don't hire me?" Who cares? Did you get more clients than you would have otherwise?
Yep.
That's the point.
Yes. Okay. And then last question here, because we already ran over time and Jane is such a loyal member. So anytime she asks a question, I always like to give her a shout out. And also just teeing you up to get you fired up, Ryan, because I think it's funny. Should you collect people into a Facebook group or does it just fritter your time?
I know, okay. First of all, the reason why Tim is taking such joy in this is because he knows I despise Facebook, and so should you. That aside, there are a lot of people who do really well with Facebook groups because that's like your little incubator of really getting to know people, right? So I recommend, doing your research, finding forums or Facebook groups, or just, watching people on a hashtag in Twitter
Yeah.
to see what they say, what their problems are, what their attitudes are, all of that stuff we talked about in the psychographic section. And then the empathetic section of being able to, okay, I understand how they feel. Can I, relate to that? And that's what you're trying to get to. So starting your own Facebook group is obviously more work and requires you to be on Facebook. But if your goal is to truly understand your audience in line with what I said in the presentation, it can work really well. There are other ways to do it without Facebook, but Facebook makes it easy, and that's why a lot of people do it. So
excellent. Well, thank you everybody for attending this week's masterclass. As always, if you have any questions, if there's anything else that I can do to be of service, please let me know. You can reach me directly at help@copyblogger.com. I always answer every email within 12 hours. So if you have a question, let me know. I'd be happy to answer it. This presentation, along with the show notes and the slides, is going to be edited and then published in the membership platform tomorrow. And I'll also email it out to everybody. So thank you so much for joining us. Brian, you got any closing words?
yeah, make sure you take out that cough.
No problem.
I was sitting there going, oh, you're going to cough. You're going to cough. Get to the end of the sentence. And luckily. No, but thanks to everyone who's here live. Appreciate it. I hope it was useful. And if Tim will point out any questions that show up in the forum and whatnot. So we'll try to get to those quickly as possible.
All right, guys, keep in touch. We'll talk later. See ya.